So welcome to the podcast, Andrew. It's great to have you on. Thanks for your time today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
So for those who haven't come across your research and across you as a coach, give us a bit of an understanding of your own perspective. As you were growing up, how did you get involved in sport and athletics, and how's that developed into what you're doing today?
Yeah, I played a lot of sports as kids. As a kid, baseball, football, basketball. I kind of tried a little bit of everything. I had an older brother that was always bigger than me and challenged me in anything physical. But I didn't really come from a super sporting family. They were very supportive and supporting me in whatever I wanted to do, but they didn't really, it wasn't one of those, I played football, so I'm going to make you into a football player kind of thing. So I just played a lot of sports growing up, and I enjoyed them, and I excelled in them. I think I was a bit of an early mature. So earlier on, I was, a little bigger and better than some of the other kids, and that kind of helped me continue down that path. And because they were, not super sheltered or anything with me, I just developed the skills that I needed to be able to thrive in those environments. And it just kept me going. I grew up in Texas playing high school football, so that's a big thing. And I actually lived in Florida for a little bit too, and we played flag football there until like high school. And we moved here when I was going to second grade, and my parents went to sign me up for football. And after they were done, they're like, okay, so you're going to pick up your pads on Saturday of this week. And my mom was like, what? And so, yeah. And then I got into tackle football as like a 8-year-old. And, that just kept going me down that route. So.
So, was that a bit of a Friday Night Lights experience for you, or did it go a bit different?
It was, I played on Friday night under the lights, but was I at a big high school like that, really good at football and everything? Not really. We went through, it was an interesting high school career and a lot of adversity, but in 4 years of high school, we went through 3 head coaches, played a lot of different positions, got moved around. I wasn't, great at any one thing. I was pretty good at kind of everything. Just worked hard and, did whatever the coach said kind of thing. But it was, compared to some other states and probably other high school football experiences, I would still say it was kind of big and, not quite what you see in that movie, but definitely has a lot of higher level feel than, some of the other high school football games I've seen and stuff like that.
So was that your primary sport, football, or were you doing any of the other kind of basketball or baseball alongside it?
So that was always my main sport. And then in middle school, I played basketball and baseball. And then my freshman year of high school, when I got there, we had powerlifting as a sport, which was new to me. I didn't even know what that was. So I got into powerlifting as a freshman, and I was still playing baseball that year. And so that was kind of all happening in the spring. So I would go to school, do my powerlifting workout in the morning, go to school all day, go do a track workout, and then go to baseball practice. And that, I made it through that year, but then I was kind of like, I need to do something else. And because football was my main sport and I looked at powerlifting as training for football and track as training for football, I dropped baseball and just continued with football, powerlifting and track throughout the rest of my career. And really powerlifting, by my senior year, I was more into powerlifting than I was football. It was the first individual sport I had really done. And I liked that aspect of it because you didn't have to rely on other people working hard. You could just work hard and, get better. And that was always big for me. So that was kind of my main sport, towards the end of my high school career.
And then how did that, opportunity or that kind of thought process of going into the coaching, sports science, strength and conditioning side of things, when did that start to become a bit of a seed for you?
Yeah, it was in high school. I think it was my junior year. We got our third coaching staff, and they came halfway through my third year. So this is like, it's crazy. But and we had a coach on staff that was a strength and conditioning coach, first time ever. Normally it was just a football coach that ran it. I didn't know anything at the time, so I was getting bigger, getting stronger. Oh, it must be working. and we got a staff, and he coached the defensive line too for football, but he was also on staff and just worked with all the sports in the weight room all day. I think he maybe taught 1 or 2 health classes or PE or something, but it was pretty, I didn't realize that was a thing. So once I saw that, and I was like, and I really enjoyed that aspect of sports in general. Like ever since I started, we started in 7th grade here. So I was like 12, 13 years old when I started lifting. I had always been into that aspect of training. And then, yeah, towards the end of high school, when I realized like I like training and preparing for the sport almost more than the sport itself. And then I realized that was an actual career path. You could actually just be a strength and conditioning coach. That's kind of when I started looking more into it. So that coach, and he didn't, do anything special at the time. He was kind of just doing what he did, and that opened my eyes to, this as a career path, and being able to do that, which is awesome.
Looking back, are there any kind of particular individuals or experiences that have really shaped your kind of journey or your coaching practice?
Other than that one experience and setting me down that path, that was what I always wanted to do. So it wasn't ever like, figuring out what I wanted to do in life and going there. That was like, once I figured out that was a thing, I just kept down that road. And then in terms of specific things, I think I spent a lot of time in different roles and different settings and things, small amounts of time, but, I kind of just picked up a little bit from each one. I wouldn't necessarily say there's one, main influencer, one mentor I worked with for a long period of time that really shaped everything. It was kind of just, pick up a couple of things here, pick up a couple of things there. I kept powerlifting, so I would, take things from that, and the coaches that helped me with that along the way. But I just try to learn from anyone and everyone I could, really. Other athletes, other coaches, if anything, trying these different roles helped me narrow my mind on what I wanted to do as a coach and who I wanted to work with and how I wanted to influence people. So those types of things, but I can't really hang my hat on one mentor like a lot of people can. It's kind of just been a long journey of bodybuilding and powerlifting and sport performance coaches and little things I pick up here and there, and then just trying to meld those together in my own framework in my head and see where those things fit.
So you kind of mentioned, obviously, shaping your thoughts a bit more around who you wanted to work with and what sort of environment, etc. So what is your kind of underlying driver, or why, or like what's become clear for you around who you want to work with and what environment that is?
Well, my main thing for really why I do a lot of things I do is I just like to help people. So like that's my why, and it's not even necessarily just in S&C. It's anything. Like if someone asks for an article, I love just being the first person to be like, oh, here's this article and this and this that I've seen out there, just to like get them down the path of learning what they want to learn. So in an S&C perspective, at different levels, you can offer a different kind of help or a different amount of help, and you have a different amount of change that you can cause in an athlete. So at one point, I had worked at a Division I college, and they're all pretty good athletes already, and you can still coach them up and coach them hard and stuff, but they're already got a good training agent, are quite experienced. And then I worked at the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid with some of the sledding sports, and at that level, they were really trained, and they had a good strength and conditioning coach there and program there, so they knew what they were doing and stuff. And sometimes there's days I would be in the weight room working all day and not really feel like I was offering much help because their technique is already good, they're already strong. You're just making minor tweaks and helping in a smaller role than you would at the middle or high school level. So those kind of things started shaping me more towards high school, and then all the other professional aspects of it in terms of job security, pay, hours, stuff like that. I mean, once you go out there and work in some not as rewarding settings, and then you realize that at the high school level you can be more rewarding, and you can also have a better fulfillment of helping people, because there's literally people trying weights for the first time or doing any of that stuff. That's kind of what helped helped me guide me on that path, and is probably going to end up keeping me here, is because you can, have someone in one semester progress so much, whereas working with an Olympic athlete for 4 months, their squat might go up 10 pounds, and that's a huge win kind of thing. And it's like, well, I'm teaching this kid how to do a body weight squat, and then they're back squatting, their body weight within a couple months. So just being able to see that, helps me, keep going.
That takes us nicely to your role at the high school. So tell us a bit about your role at Tyler Legacy High. What does it look like day to day? Obviously, things have been a bit to and fro with the COVID situation, but what's the kind of, I guess, the idea of your role and what impact you're trying to make there?
Yep. So it's a high school with about 2,400 kids, 6A classification, the biggest one we have here in Texas. The schedule this year, there's 5 athletic periods. So, I'll have anywhere from basically 3 to 7 sessions a day. So normally the normal school day is 8:15 to 4 o'clock. And I'll have, 5 sessions within that. Depending on the time of the year, I might have a session before school or a session after school. And then I also work with our middle schools. We have 2 middle schools that feed into our high school. We have, I guess there's technically more, but I work with 2 middle schools that feed into our high school. So I'll go to one once a week and another once a week. And the way the schedule's set up and when I'm allowed to go there, I really am only working with 8th grade girls at those schools this year. So that's typically how it works. I'm the strength and conditioning coach. There's only one of me, and there's the sport coaches that will help when their team comes in the weight room. So how it is in Texas, and there's a lot of stuff going on Twitter right now about, different roles and stuff in high school, but I think we have it figured out here where I don't need a teaching certification. I don't teach any classes formally. So the sport coaches are, in charge for attendance and role and, marking grades in the grade book for them. I basically just have to show up and coach, which is awesome because it allows me to do what I'm there for, and I don't have to worry about the admin side of things. Even role, like it's not hard, but it's just another thing and another aspect that, is great to have someone else take care of that. So I do that. I'll have anywhere from, 15 to 80 kids in the weight room at once, depending how many teams we have. So basically a kid will show up for athletics and I'll sit down with the coach and decide we'll work out their lifting schedule based on when they want to lift and what days, what I have, what teams in and stuff. And, so I could have one team in there by themselves. I could have 3 teams in there all at once. And I've, got programs for each of those teams, and the coaches are helping run that program for their team. And I'm kind of floating and helping where I see fit.
So is it fair to say the kind of premise of the role is more around the performance of the sport teams or performance of the athletes rather than kind of, physical education more widely?
For sure. Like I have nothing to do with PE curriculum or PE kids at the school or, necessarily a holistic approach to their health either. They have health classes that they take. They have PE classes that they take. If they take athletics, that counts as their PE credit. So they don't need to take PE. But the way the program is set up is around sports performance for the most part. Not all the kids in there are necessarily trying to play at the highest level or, there's still definitely kids in there for fun and whatnot. So the goals of the program don't really change, but how I deliver it and my expectations of and what I'm trying to get out of it are a little different in terms of, this kid's not going to play soccer after high school. So we don't need to do super advanced training. I'm just trying to teach them some basic things so that when they graduate high school and they go to LA Fitness, they'll know how to do a squat or, something like that. So I definitely approach it with that mindset, depending on the group, because there's different groups and different, and even within those groups, there's different athletes. There might be an athlete in a group that is high level, and there might be an athlete in the same group that is not. So they might be doing the same program, but how I coach them might be slightly different based on, their ability levels, their desires to play at the next level and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not I don't teach a PE class. They don't come to me for weight training or health or anything like that. they come to athletics to train to get better for their sport, essentially.
And is that set up quite common across Texas? Like, obviously you mentioned your own experience, it wasn't until you were sort of halfway through your high school career that you had a strength and conditioning coach, but is that common now to have a high school S&C coach?
Yes. And it varies so much state by state. But once again, this is where I think Texas or our district has it right, because I can do that. And, it's a whole different debate whether that's the best system or not. But in terms of, getting the athletes that I need in the door and being able to do what I need to do without other distractions, it's the best as a strength and conditioning coach to have it set up like this. Whereas I know other states and maybe even other schools within Texas, if a kid wants to train for their sport during the school day, they'll sign up for a weight training class or a, strength and conditioning class. And then you'll have all these different sports mixed together in one class. And, there's ways you can program and deliver that system, but it's, then it's a coach thinking about, okay, how about I make this a curriculum based class, where we might have to have grades or stuff like that. That's a whole different approach probably to how you would set the class up. Whereas for me, it's not necessarily required, so I haven't done that. There are some other more holistic things I would like to blend into our program, so it's not, just this performance-based thing. But I would say it's common, and that's how it was when I was in high school. I took athletics. I never took PE since 7th grade. We train for a sport, or if your sport's in off season, then you're doing off season training where you're lifting and running and doing that kind of stuff. So I would say it's pretty common in Texas. Other states I know are different, and they might have their program set up slightly different as well.
And then, like you obviously mentioned, anywhere between sort of 15 to 80 kids at a session, which is that must be pretty demanding. How do you work the logistics with that? Obviously, you got a bit of help from the technical, the sport coaches, but what does that kind of look like in terms of that variability?
Yeah, when it's less kids, it's easy because I like having teams by themselves because I can tailor everything more to them. Give them more sport specific examples for how this is going to help their sport. Versus if I have 3 teams and they're all doing a similar movement, I have to say, well, this jump is helping this movement in this sport and this movement in this sport. And, it does help all those movements, but it's easier when you can tailor everything. And, each team has their kind of different vibe and different culture when they come in there anyway. So just being able to match that and be on their wavelength instead of, different teams that operating at different levels and seeing each other, how they do that makes it a little difficult. But I mean, we have 12 combo racks in our weight room. So like 2 rows of 6 double-sided racks. So we have 24 workstations. So if I get 3 or 4 kids per station, like logistically we can fit everyone in there, and then we'll kind of just split the teams up so they're not all mismatched. Okay, softball's over there, baseball's over here, maybe another team over there off to the side. And so last year, my first year there, I would just write the workout on the board, on a whiteboard, which is all the way on one side of the weight room. We have like a long, narrow weight room. It was all the way on one side. Because we have 2 rows of racks, it's hard to see sometimes. And I would really only have 2 programs at that point. I would have one for like my freshman novice groups and one for the older groups. And all the sports would do similar things. I would change the sets and reps for the teams that are in our off season. So I've evolved from that now to like having sheets at every rack with a whole block on there. So like 3 or 5 weeks of training at a time. And each sport, not necessarily each sport has their own team, but each block of sports that are competing in the same season frame of the season, whatever, will have, their workout, and they can read it at their rack. It's got notes in there and stuff. I'll send that stuff to the coaches with videos so they can help coach. So logistically, that's how I do it. We don't have iPads at every rack with Team Builder or anything like that yet. But I've tried to get a system going where they have the things that they need at their rack, so they don't have to say, I can't see the board, because that was an excuse a lot of times last year. I'm like, well, just take a couple steps over and look at the board and then go back to your rack. But now I've got the sheet there. They've got their sets and reps there. And it might be that, everyone's doing a squat pattern, but baseball is doing this version because they're in season, and basketball's doing this version because they're off season. But basically the same template I'll use for every group.
So obviously you're in Texas now, but it wasn't so long ago that you were very far away from Texas, undertaking your PhD down in New Zealand. So tell us a bit about that. How did that pop up? What was I mean, that must have been a big gamble to relocate from America to New Zealand. Talk us through that whole experience.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was kind of the same way I started my master's, but I was finishing my undergrad and not really feeling ready to go into the workforce and not really, knowing what all it entailed in terms of networking and doing all this extra stuff just to get a job. I thought you get a degree and you can find a job, but it's not how it works. So kind of same thing. As I was finishing my master's, I went to Appalachian State, and there was some professors there that had contacts and had gone to Australia for their PhD and stuff. So we would just get these emails coming in from AUT, from John Cronin, about all these scholarship opportunities. And I'm like, man, I could go do a PhD, get paid 40 grand, which is more than you make as an assistant at a Division I college here as an assistant strength coach. And I could go like live in New Zealand. Like, that's a pretty good deal. So it's not that I was pursuing that hard as much as like, well, why not do that? Like, that's, it's going to take care of the next 3 or 4 years of my life. I'm going to, come out with a PhD. I was always achievement driven and wanted to be the best at everything. So I'm like, okay, if I get a PhD, there's nothing more I can really do. Like, I've hit the top level in terms of academic achievements, I guess. So I reached out to JC, John Cronin, and before I was even done and was in the works and talking to him about different scholarships, and he's like, well, you still have a whole nother year yet, so there's not a lot we can do. So I was like, okay, I just keep making good grades in grad school. And as I was finishing there, I was planning to go out there and just self-fund a PhD. And I was big into powerlifting, and Eric Helms and Scott Brown were out there. And they had, I knew that they had done powerlifting research and, very practical applied strength training stuff, which is what I liked. I didn't want to go, do a PhD in a lab, studying molecular biology or anything. So I'm like, oh, they do cool research. Like, I'll just go take my research paper I wrote for my master's class and like try to, expand on that. And it was basically looking at the differences between deadlift styles. So we're talking about that, and I was getting ready to do that. And then John Cronin, because we were in connection now, so he had these series of scholarships opening up, working with these high schools there. There was like 3 or 4 roles they had opening around the same time. And they were just trying to look at, they basically placed at different schools trying to hit different parts of youth development so they could, have a good overall picture of it. And so that's how that ended up working out, really, was like through all this time of me just getting ready to go out there and self-fund myself and do powerlifting research. He's like, hey, well, what are your thoughts on this? And it was a great role because it was applied, it was within a school, and I, coaching was part of the PhD, and there was coaching I could do outside the PhD. So it could keep my, me coaching too, instead of, if I was doing this other research, I'd have to find my own coaching. It wouldn't meld with my PhD, all that. So it just seemed like and it was funded. There was a scholarship for it. So it was kind of just the stars aligning at the right time in the right place. And that's what sent me out there. And then I had always wanted to go to New Zealand and travel and stuff. So that seemed just like a good, life experience to go out there and do it there. I don't know if I would have done it anywhere in the US. Like, I didn't want to get a PhD no matter what. It was kind of just like, that was a good reason and a good time to do it. And I really wanted to do it there. I also had one of my mentors when I was doing my undergrad, Frank Bourgeois, he went out there from Midwestern State here in Texas, and that kind of first turned my eyes onto it. I'm like, why is he going to New Zealand for a PhD? I didn't know anything about AUT or Springs at that point. And then like I kept hearing more about it and read a cool paper, and then see like all these people from AUT, and I'm like, oh man, like that's awesome. So just a culmination of little things here and there. And then when it finally became realistic, then I was like, this is going to be good.
So tell us a bit about the research that you're looking at, because I think some of it's got some real interesting kind of themes running through it. So give us a bit of an overview of, I mean, obviously you conduct multiple studies, but what was kind of the theme that you're investigating?
Yeah, so I really wanted to dive into the topic of, Olympic lifting and the controversy of, is it beneficial, is it not beneficial for development? Um, that was the overarching kind of thing, and I wasn't necessarily biased. I had my own viewpoints of what I thought, but I wanted to take an objective approach to it and see, there's not a lot of research in that area, so I wanted to try to provide some in that area just to be able to refer to in the future. And so that was really the main thing, was like, there's a lot of coaches talking and saying, oh, we can get the same things with med balls and jumps as, Olympic lifting. And I just wanted to, there is no research really looking at that. I wanted to, provide some data and say, well, actually, there is some things we can actually use an evidence-based approach instead of it takes too long to teach or it's too advanced, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to provide some data in that area because there wasn't really a lot out there, and especially in youth, where I believe is where it needs to be taught. The earlier, the better kind of thing. So that's what kind of sparked me going down that path.
And what I liked about your PhD was, as you kind of said, there was a lot of coaching involvement and involvement in the school. Like obviously this part around integrating resistance training into a high school curriculum and then basically seeing the outcomes of that. So what did that journey look like of the actual research in terms of how you got things integrated and then the results you started to see?
Yeah, it was a long process. So the degrees there are all research based, so there's no coursework. It's typically 3 years is what you have to get it done. Some people finish earlier, some later, but how it was set up there and for what I wanted to do with the longer intervention. Basically, the first year I was there, I was just in the school writing up my proposal, getting accustomed to everything. They had what they called the Sports Institute at this school, St. John's College, and it was a class they could take or trial to get into. So they trial as a year 8 to get into this class, and it was basically catered to their top sports. So basketball, rugby, rowing, football, and cricket. And what this class allowed them to do, it was in addition to PE, so it wasn't in place of PE like things are here. It was you take PE and you also can take this as like an elective. And then during the school day, you can get more specialized training for your sport, whatever that is. And me, and with all the, talk around early specialization and stuff like that, I wanted to kind of turn this class into a more general athletic development class that could cater for many sports, because we had some good athletes in non-traditional sports, like some martial artists, some track guys that were high-level athletes. They just weren't getting any support. They didn't really have a strength and conditioning program there or anything, so they had a bit of a weight room, but they didn't really have any system about how they used it or anything. So that was my approach, was like, okay, can we take this class that caters for more sport specific training? So like, you're already doing all this rowing and now you're going to come row or learn the technique more. And can we, work on athletic development, building up a base, building some strength and movement skills, which is going to benefit you for your sport. But if you play multiple sports, then it's going to benefit multiple sports. And if you play these other sports that we are not catering for, it's going to allow some more diversity within the class. So the first year was kind of changing that and, working on just getting those relationships built within the school for the people I'll need their help with. So other PE teachers there. That was basically the first year, and I was just writing alongside that my proposal. And I actually don't think we really changed much in terms of how the class ran. Like, they still did their sport specific stuff, but they allowed me some time to do some other stuff. So I would take a warm up and do some athletic stuff, or every once in a while I would run a workout. for everyone instead of them breaking up into their sports, but they still, basketball went and did more basketball stuff. So the second year we got everything in place where we basically changed the name from the Sports Institute Athlete Development Program. It was more broad. So we still had the trial process, but we made it more general. So instead of coming and doing cricket drills to see which cricketers we were going to take, we came and did some broad jumps, some sprints, we got their, don't think we did their maturation, but I think we got their parents' information. We tried to figure out their predicted adult height. I can't remember if that was the second or third year, but either way, the trial process was more broad, so we could get some different athletes in there, and then we basically were set up to do the intervention that second year. So we were going to try to roll it out for over the 4 terms, have different training blocks each term, and it would be all about athletic development in this resistance training program instead of, they didn't do any sports stuff that year really. And that's kind of how it was. And then the third year we carried that program on. My research was done, but because we weren't trying to stick to this strict intervention and timetables and program, it was a bit more, varied in what we did, but it was the same premise of, we have some really good athletes in these other sports. Can we help them out too, instead of, just our main sports that we're focusing on at the school.
So what were some of the outcomes of the research that you did in terms of, obviously you mentioned motor skill and obviously some of the other things around injury risk factors and movement competencies. So what were some of the results that you saw from that?
Yep. So one of our studies was just a cross-sectional study looking at the relationship between strength and some of these different motor skills. And what we found was relative strength was most important for a lot of these motor skills, had the highest correlations, and regression analysis showed that higher relative strength was more important for sprint performance and jump performance. Then looking at the actual intervention, what we found was the groups. So we had a weightlifting group that did weightlifting movements, and we had a traditional resistance training group that did similar but different movements. So that's kind of, I set it up that way because that's the argument, is why do a clean if I could just do a deadlift and and a jump. So it's like, okay, we're getting a similar range of motion and we're trying to hit similar loads or velocities, but it's easier to teach. That's kind of where I was looking at, is if you weren't going to do a clean or snatch, what are you going to do? And let's do that stuff and see if there's any merit to that. We didn't find a whole lot of difference between the groups over the course of the year. What we did find with both groups was that strength and movement skill improved earlier in the intervention. So over the first 2 terms, their jump and throw performance did not really improve, and their sprint performance, but we found their isometric mid-thigh pull strength, and we used the resistance training skills battery as our movement skill indicator, and we found those improved earlier on, which was interesting, but makes sense as you kind of look into it more. And then the sprint, jump, and throw performance improved more in the second half of the year as loads increase. So that was kind of an insight, because you kind of get those novice gains if you have no training age and you are learning how to do movements correctly, and mainly these resistance training movements that we tested. We didn't necessarily perform all those movements throughout the whole year, but we did perform some of them and most of them at times. And it was just, the test that we chose to use because we're looking specifically at resistance training. So, as you get instruction with that and the load is light, your movement skills are going to improve. And then once you have a perfect score on the squat, it can't really improve anymore anyway. So you can't really expect it to always keep going up. And then same with strength, like they get these kind of novice strength gains early on, and then they keep getting stronger, but not quite as much as they establish a baseline level of strength. And then over the course of the year, those, as their nervous system becomes more coordinated, I suppose they're able to translate those strength gains into their sprint, jump, and throw performance. So we ran a 10, 20, 30 meter sprint. We did vertical and horizontal jumps, and we did just a seated med ball chest pass. those were kind of like our athletic measures. And then for strength, we did isometric mid thigh pull and a resistance training skills battery. And that was kind of our big study looking at motor skill performance. And then we did another study that was using those same tests, but looking at the effects on injury risk factors. So landing kinematics, we did the tuck jump assessment, which is repeated jumps for 10 seconds. And there's a movement screen criteria that you rate based on that. And we did the Y balance test to see, if it improved balance or any asymmetries. And we found not a whole lot going on there either. Both groups improved their overall movement skill, and the traditional resistance training group improved their tuck jump performance more or significantly over the course of the year. The weightlifting group did not. Resistance training did. They reduced the amount of errors they were making when they performed a tuck jump. So my thoughts are they were potentially able to load movements heavier. They improved their strength more. They were actually performing jumps and depth jumps instead of snatches and stuff or clean and jerks. Or we didn't jerk, cleans. And so they actually got a bit more specific practice at that and improved their strength a bit more over the course of the year. So that was our main findings from the experimental stuff. With the other chapters earlier on and setting the scene for everything, you kind of alluded to it earlier, and it's really the paper that's gotten the most traction was my first chapter, was just looking at different models of resistance training, because I wanted to build a whole picture of, I didn't want to get too specific with weightlifting and, is it beneficial? I wanted to show how it fits within the overall scheme of training youth and how you can implement it. So the first chapter was looking at different long-term athletic development models and youth training models and aligning them together to see these different, training stages that a lot of models have and share, and, where weightlifting fits into that and how you could integrate it, as well as strength training and balance and plyometrics and stuff like that. And then more specifically, so that was a very broad overall approach. Then my next chapter was kind of narrowing that down into how do you actually implement these ideas into a school setting. And that paper basically has my intervention in a template or a way of how we went about organizing our model there. So it's specific to our school system, but anywhere in Australia or New Zealand and maybe the UK probably has a similar setup in terms of the different terms and, how you could progress things over time. The US is a little different, but it's, I take a similar approach here. It's just, how you can progress, different movement patterns over time and how you change variables based on their training age and stuff like that. And then, we got into the more experimental stuff where we're actually saying, okay, once you do this type of intervention, what kind of effects can it have on youth and their performance?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in your PhD study for those who are operating in this realm, because as you said, basically you've kind of summarized all the different models out there for them, which a lot of people, first of all, aren't aware of. People might have heard of long-term athletic development theory, but they haven't heard of youth physical development model, or I always forget the name of Jean Cotte's one. But, I think you did a really good job there of comparing and contrasting those models, because a lot of people tend to just go with the first one they've heard and off they go. And, not all models, we know all models aren't perfect, but they all have some utility. And I think you did a really good job of pulling that out there. But then again, as you said there, a really practical kind of like snapshot of like, well, here's actually what I did. Like, here's the program, here's what it looks like, here's how we integrate it into a school. And then these are the effects. So for those people who are maybe trying to reinvent the wheel in their individual school, you've kind of set out, well, look, here's someone who's already managed to do that. You don't need to go in and reinvent the wheel. Or, we often, people, particularly like yourself, there might be one coach operating in a school, and there's one coach operating in a school, a few miles away, and everyone's trying to do stuff on their own. Whereas actually you've laid out a really good kind of journey, if you like, of how to do this and how to integrate it.
Yeah, no, that was the goal, was to have people that either not necessarily weren't experienced, because you still want qualified coaches rolling this stuff out, but just having a bit of structure and a plan of how you do it. And ours was focused on kind of early training group, low training age and very introductory model, but you could easily, and there's some other papers out there there's a really good paper out there. I think it's Ian Jeffries that has a 4-step model of a high school. So it's got 4 different years and how you can, progress each year over time. But a lot of the papers are just so general and broad that, it gives you good conceptual ideas of things and theoretical things, but there's not a lot out there in terms of like, okay, so when I go into the gym Monday, what am I going to do? And that's where I think there is an area for more research, definitely, but having more insight into the interventions that are in papers. A lot of times they just breeze over the training section to get into the results, and it's like, well, the training is the important part, because if you get good results and a team wants to go do your training, the more details you can provide on that, the better. So I think, having more stuff out there that gives insight into, and especially into real schools, not theoretical concepts, which mine was, but that is actually what we use, but things that, okay, this is what we did and this is what worked. There's also a good paper from James Baker that's similar title, integrating S&C into school setting, and he's got examples of, our 10 meter went from this to this after this training block and stuff like that. That's good stuff, I think, for coaches. Even if you do know what you're doing or have an idea, it's still good to either verify what you are doing is kind of on the right path, or give you some ideas just about how to structure your things a bit.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I'm sure we probably share the same perspective that we would love it if the best coaches in the world were operating at the youth level, because you just set the future up for success. But the reality is, certainly in the UK, it's actually where probably the least experienced coaches are operating. And once they've done their time and paid their dues, they move on to a university or an institute or a professional club, because the wages are better. So that's where they go. So you often end up with people repeating the mistakes. But having people like Ian Jeffries with his Cougar Power model, James Baker with his, and yours here, shows, it kind of almost helps people shortcut that process. Like, you don't have to make the mistakes because someone's made them for you, and here's how you can do it. But the fact that, I don't know, obviously you'll have done a meta-analysis and got more out there, but the fact that we can name 3 off the top, but I don't think there's that much more out there of people who've gone, here's in the real world what I actually did, in a school setting, or, in a high school setting. And here's how you could go and replicate it. As you said, people tend to skip over that. And it's like, well, hang on, that's the bit I was reading the journal for. I want to see what you did. I want to know how I can go and apply that to my context. Whereas often people, as you say, just skip to the results.
Yeah, definitely. There's another good group in Australia that does, I don't know exactly who's on that or what even school they're from, but I just know that there's a bunch of studies coming out with them doing resistance training interventions in the high school setting, but with like 10,000 kids kind of thing. Like they're very large scale. And I know it's stuff with app, and it's not all performance based, and it's more around overall health measures, but it's still a good look at what people are doing. It can be integrated into schools, and it is effective. And it's interesting kind of what you were saying, because it's kind of flipping here a little bit, because we're getting some really good coaches at the high school levels, and I guess we've had them for a long time over here, but more people are realizing that it's a really good setting in terms, because like you said, in the UK and maybe other places, the higher up you go, the more you get paid. But here it's almost the other way around. Like the ceiling is higher at the D1 school, but the floor is so much lower. So, there is a strength coach here that makes 800 grand, but there's like 10 that make over 100 or 200 or whatever. And then everyone else is, if you're not the head guy at a big school, you see a lot of assistant jobs for 35, 45K. And it's like, at almost any high school that's a full-time role, you're going to be making more than that. You're going to work less hours. It's going to be less stressful. You're not going to have to travel. Like, it's better, it's better lifestyle, and it's more pay. So it's, I think now we're getting some good coaches coming down from college into the high school setting, and just coaches are seeking out the high school setting instead of like a backup plan, like, oh, I couldn't make it, or, oh, I'm not progressing. Now there is still a lot of work to be done at the high school level here. There's strength and conditioning at the high school level ran by sport coaches, and some of it's okay and some of it's not so good. But it's definitely serious enough to like get some traction and get funding for it over time and stuff. So I think that will continue to improve. But you definitely do see some good coaches, especially here in Texas. It seems like that at the high school level that are doing, good stuff. They get good support to do what they need to do, and yeah, and you can see it in their athletes and like the kids, the athletes that go on to the next level. They're prepared very well. Some of them. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the UK is maybe, I used to say 10 years behind, maybe I'm leaning more towards 20 these days. But like if you look at the trends that come out of America and you wait a decade, they come out in the UK. CrossFit, collegiate S&C coaches, high school S&C coaches is the one I'm seeing now. If I kind of go back 10 years ago when I was, doing my undergrad, you didn't really see S&C jobs in a high school or in a secondary school here in the UK. It didn't really happen. And if it was someone who was a PE teacher that was maybe doing this on the side. Whereas now, even in the last month, I've seen, S&C jobs coming up. So I do think you're right in that trend. People are starting to value it. Hopefully we can follow in your footsteps and get people who are more experienced coaches choosing to be there rather than, people choosing that as their first step to somewhere else. So I think that trend's interesting because I always keep an eye on what you guys are doing over there because I think, 10 years time, that'll be us. So it's interesting to see that. So looking, kind of summarizing your research and, for those people who, I guess wanting a kind of snapshot, what would be your kind of general thoughts and recommendations from what you kind of, your findings and your summary of your research?
So I think the biggest takeaway, especially with the weightlifting movements, is it's safe and it's effective. There's not a lot of kids that got hurt. Well, no one got hurt doing the weightlifting movements throughout the whole intervention. And it's effective. It's essentially just as effective as a resistance training, regular, traditional resistance training for improving these measures of performance. So I think there's two ways to look at that. And and your bias is going to basically, tell you how you look at it. But you could say, there's no difference between the training groups, so we shouldn't use it because we can get the same benefits from these other things. Or you could say, there's no difference between the groups, so you might as well give them another tool in their toolbox, and this other method of training that they can, if they keep practicing, might be more beneficial later on the road. So that was kind of a limitation, was, a lot of our training was so light that it was very technique based, and we didn't really get a lot of load on there till the fourth term when they were doing cleans from the ground with, some of them probably 60 kilos or something. But if we were to carry that study on for 2, 3, 4 years, and now, one person's cleaning 120 and one person's deadlifting 140 and doing a jump, like now are those things the same comparable as what we were doing, week 3 of the program? So that's, another way you could look at it is, well, if there is no difference between them, why would you not just teach them one more method of training? But, overall recommendations, it comes back to kind of just general things, even without my research, but keeping it basic in terms of not getting super fancy with your training, and smart progressive overload with what you're doing. So having a good progression plan of the movements that you're progressing and the way you are modifying the load and tempos and things over time. And then variety, giving kids different movements to master and different movement challenges to enhance their overall, coordination, I think is key. So that's probably the main things. And it's not so much for my experimental stuff as some of it is just the overall theme that was in the, the first lit review with the different models. That's kind of the theme you see. And then it's just how can I integrate those within my system and setting. And it's going to be different for everyone, but if you stick to the basic principles of adaptation and, performance, I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And, the methods are many, but the principles are few. So your program can look very different, but as long as you're sticking to like the basic key principles of training, I think you're on the right path, and then everyone's going to have their own spin on that. But it's safe and effective, and um, do it the best you can in your setting, given your constraints and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I'd really recommend if people haven't come across your articles or your publications, to jump on Researchgate and have a look, particularly if they're working, in an environment similar like a high school or secondary school, because I think, it's something that I've given to my interns, because often, at universities, they're taught all about potentiation and bands and chains and, force plates and all the kind of funky stuff. And then they go to work in an academy and they've got absolutely no clue about long-term athletic development, the youth physical development model, or any of these concepts that actually form 90% of the athlete's journey.
Yeah.
So I have specifically in our curriculum for our interns, I've included your work here because I think it is really valuable, and it plugs a gap that a lot of people have when they come out of university, because this isn't given enough due there. So I would really recommend people go and check you out on Researchgate and have a look at what you've put together there, because it does form a really useful and valuable piece of knowledge that maybe isn't there elsewhere. So where can people find you social media wise and on Researchgate, etc.? Where are you hanging out these days?
I'm kind of out there on a lot of different stuff. Instagram, I don't have like a coaching Instagram. I just have a personal Instagram that I mainly post my own training on there. I've got also Instagram, and that's just Andrew.Pichardo. I've got a Instagram for the school account that I run that has some more of our actual training, which is TL_strength. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. I don't really post a lot of stuff on there, but Researchgate and Twitter, Instagram is probably the best way to see some of the stuff that I actually do. But yeah, you can connect with me anywhere, email, Facebook, and anything that you use, you can connect if you have any questions. But those are
So what's next for you? What's coming up on the horizon in the next 12 months?
I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. It's weird because this is our second year. This is my second year at this school, and it's a different schedule than we had last year. Next year we're gonna have a different schedule than we had this year. So like 3 years, 3 different school schedules, 3 different logistical workings that I'm having to do. But we're getting a new facilities built, so new indoor turf space, new weight room next year. Well, coming in the summer. So a couple months for that to be ready, which will be good. I don't really have any other big plans coming up that I know of right now. I'm just, trying to improve my coaching practice, and, we're getting hoping to get some more technology in and try to integrate that in a bit more. I'm not really doing a whole lot of research stuff right now. I've got some other kind of side projects going on, but I don't have like an agenda that I'm carrying out or anything. So I would love to continue that aspect of, and some of the work that I did before, because I'm at a place with a lot of athletes coming through the door, and we don't have a strict testing protocol set up, but it's very, it's logistically, it can work to just do some data collection here and there and like start to get some ideas churning and, testing some ideas out. So I'm going to, slowly work on trying to do some of that, but I'm not in a university setting, so it's kind of difficult. But yeah, just continue to keep coaching, and I just took on some online clients, starting to do that this year. So I'm going to try to build that up a little bit. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I really, it's great to have someone to be able to come on and explain their research, especially when it's this specific to the kind of domain that we're working in. So thanks a lot, again, for your time and your effort today.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.